Okay, here's what we know. Right now in this country, as in almost all developed countries, it is considered unethical for a physician to actively, deliberately end a patient's life by means of a lethal injection, let's say, what Rachel describes as active euthanasia. And for that reason, the American Medical Association prohibits the behavior, and that practice is indeed criminalized. By contrast, it is considered permissible, and indeed it's quite common, for physicians to allow a patient to die by simply removing that patient from, let's say, a ventilator, what Rachel describes as passive euthanasia. Along comes Rachel's. Rachel's thinks that the distinction underlying active and passive euthanasia does not mark out an interesting or significant moral distinction. For Rachel's part, he sees no interesting difference between killing someone and allowing somebody to die, all things being equal. Hence, you have the story about the uncle and the nephew. Sullivan thinks that Rachel's is mistaken. Sullivan thinks the AMA is actually correct, that there is an interesting moral difference between active euthanasia, what Rachel describes as active euthanasia, and passive euthanasia. So that distinction ought to be sustained, according to Sullivan. The title of Sullivan's article is An Impertinent Distinction. He doesn't come out directly to say what that impertinent distinction is, although he does describe very carefully in the article what he thinks that distinction, that impertinent distinction is that Rachel's has made. I want to know from you what that distinction is, that impertinent distinction. And again, by impertinent, he just means it's not relevant, it's not pertinent. Um, this is a waste of time to be talking about what Rachel's is talking about. So the first part of the assignment is to identify what that impertinent distinction is. That is, what the irrelevant distinction is. The second part is to say what the interesting moral distinction is. That is, the distinction that Rachel's failed to identify. Because Sullivan thinks there is an important moral distinction, and that important moral distinction does underlie and sustain the distinction the AMA makes between actively terminating a patient's life and simply allowing that patient to die because they want to refuse further life-sustaining treatment. That's the plan. All right? Good deal.